Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy DeYoung. I would like to welcome you to another prophecy moment. We're going to take about 5 or 10 minutes and talk about a particular headline in the Middle East. Here's the headline: Iran is pulling out of Syria. That is a key headline in the Middle East, and particularly in the state of Israel. Iran, for the last several years, has partnered with Russia as they went into Syria to help prop up Bashar Assad, who is the president of Syria. He's been fighting a civil war for almost 8 years now. Thousands and thousands have been killed, and multiple thousands have gone out of Syria trying to get into Europe or to immigrate someplace in the world to get away from this war-torn country. You say, well, why in the world would Iran partner with Russia? Well, the reason is that Russia, you might remember, gave the technology and the technicians to Iran for the purpose of developing a nuclear weapon of mass destruction. Now, that is key as you look at the Middle East and the military balance in that very, very important region of the world. But the news now is that Iran is pulling out of Syria. They had about 100,000 members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And now they are pulling those men out of the country. They're going to quit their help with helping to prop up Bashar Assad. You might remember, not only did they partner with Russia, they partnered with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is one of their surrogate terrorist organizations that is located there in southern Lebanon. The manpower, the monies, and the materials in order to be able to fight a war have been provided to Hezbollah by the Iranians. But now the headline is Iran is pulling out of Syria. Well, Ken Timmerman, one of my broadcast partners located there in southern France, is going to give us the details about this pullout by the Iranians from the state of Syria, where they have been located at least within 2.5 miles of the Jewish state, with a stated purpose of being there to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, which, of course, Israel is the little Satan. They also want to go after the big Satan, which is the United States of America. I want to have Ken Timmerman now come and give us the latest information about this Iranian pullout of Syria. I understand that an Israeli defense official has made the statement that Iran is pulling out of Syria. How serious is that statement?
Well, it's a big deal, and there appears to be very much some truth to this. The Iranians have been hammered again by the Israeli Defense Forces, by the Air Force. The Air Force has hit their positions and their bases all across Syria, not just close to Israel, but as far away as you can get up along the Iraqi border. The Iranians were not expecting that to happen. They thought that the Russians would protect them with their new S-300 and S-400 air defense missiles in Syria. The Russians have not protected them at all, and the Israelis have been able to penetrate those missile defenses. And now it appears, and it really does appear to be true, that they are starting to pull back some of the Revolutionary Guard's forces in Syria. They're being hit very hard by the collapse in oil prices, which was coordinated between Russia and Saudi Arabia, as you recall, just about 2 months ago. That's hitting them very, very hard because 80% of their income of the government comes from the sale of oil. They're not able to get oil out onto the black market any longer because of U.S. sanctions. So they are being hit very hard, and I would say one more very important thing about this, Jimmy, is that we're seeing now the payoff for what I think was a very courageous operation carried out by U.S. Special Forces at the direction of President Trump in early January of this year to kill Qasem Soleimani, the head of Iran's Quds Force, their overseas terrorist task force, their guerrillas on the ground. And these are the people who were running the operations in Syria, and they no longer have the juice with the Iranian government that they had when Soleimani was alive. So by taking out Soleimani, we have also, I won't say we've crippled the Quds force, but we have definitely weakened them very seriously. And that's a good thing.
Do you notice the last name that Ken mentioned in his report? Soleimani. General Soleimani was the mastermind as to what the Iranians would do as it relates to the Middle Eastern region of the world. They had a great constituency of military personnel there in Syria. They have a number of political leaders that have gone into Iraq to help direct that government as they try to come out of their war-torn country after the many battles that did take place there in the 90s. But I want you to understand that though Iran is pulling out today, and that's the latest headline, and I believe that Ken was able to give you some information why that well may be true. I want you to understand, here's the next headline. Iran will come back and go after the Jewish state of Israel. In the book of Ezekiel, chapter 38, also the book of Psalms 83, and then the book of Daniel, chapter 11, we look at a number of nations that are going to align themselves against the Jewish state of Israel. If you have your Bible, go to Ezekiel chapter 38 and find verse 5, and I want you to know who Persia is. There in 38th chapter of Ezekiel, verse 5, it says, and Persia. It also mentions Ethiopia and Libya, but I want you to look at the first nation there mentioned, Persia. You may not recognize a Persia name for a nation today, but until 1936, that's what Iran was called, Persia. So modern-day Persia is Iran. And in this coalition of nations talked about in these three chapters, again, Ezekiel 38, Psalm 83, and Daniel chapter 11, an alignment of Islamic nations led by Russia are going to go after the Jewish state of Israel, and they're going to do that in the period of time after the rapture of the church at the beginning of the tribulation period. Let me just show you two verses here in Ezekiel chapter 38. Look at the last couple of words in verse 8. It's talking about all the Jews being gathered from all the nations of the world coming back into the land. Now notice the last couple of words it says here in verse 8, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. Look up here at verse 11 in Ezekiel chapter 38. This is a military terminology, and it says that they shall live in unwalled villages, all of them dwelling safely. Now I say that's a military terminology. When Ezekiel wrote this book about 2,500 years ago, there were no F-16s, no Mark V tanks, the most sophisticated tank in the world, no Apache attack helicopters. What did the Jewish people use to secure their residency wherever it may have been? They would build a wall around the city. So when it says they're living in unwalled villages, that's talking about the Israelites of yesterday, the Jewish people of today, laying down their weapons, tearing down the walls in yesterday, having no major military hardware for protecting themselves today. They will dwell safely in the land. Now, when is it that they will dwell safely? Well, of course, when the Messiah, Jesus Christ, comes back, he will establish a peace across the world. But that's not when we're talking about this battle of Gog and Magog, and Persia, modern-day Iran, being a major player in that alignment of nations that will be led by the Russians to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. We're talking about a period of time after the rapture, and then after that, the Antichrist appears. He confirms a peace agreement, Daniel 9:27. The Jewish people believe this Antichrist is their Messiah. They believe he's brought peace to the earth by confirming this peace agreement, and they lay down their weapons. And so it's pretty soon after the rapture, in the beginning, I would say the first 6 months of the tribulation period, when Iran, who is supposedly today leaving Syria, will return to that region of the world to join this alignment of nations led by Russia to go in and wipe Israel off the face of the earth. But did you notice what I said just a moment ago? When is that going to happen? It's going to happen after the rapture of the church. They're leaving today. They may be coming back tomorrow. All we have to do is understand it happens after the rapture of the church. And that's the next event on God's calendar of activities. That rapture actually could happen at any moment. Having made that statement, nothing left for me to say except let's keep looking up until.